So about a month ago, I returned from conducting fieldwork with 2 coffee growing cooperatives in the state of Chiapas, Mexico. And the focus of my current work is an examination of tension in the communities that are growing organic coffee for the fair trade marketplace while simultaneously growing corn for subsistence. However, my talk today is actually going to be more focused on the importance of corn and the practices of farmers in the Highlands. At the center of my research are indigenous Mayan farmers who are linked up with 2 social movements that were established in Chiapas, and these social movements, the main their main force is to be rebelling against the state. And one group, the Zapatistas, has been cultivating their resistance and desire for indigenous rights to land, education, health, among many other things, since the 1970s, made their first public appearance by staging an armed rebellion in urban and rural areas in Chiapas that coincided with the January 1st, 1994 passing of the North American Free Trade Agreement. The other group, called the Abejas, or the Bees, was formed in 1992 around issues of gender equality and land tenure relations, and their pacifist and religious approach was made public through the 1997 tragedy of the massacre at Acteal, where 45 men, women, and children were gunned down at a mass for peace. These pictures were taken in the city, by me in the city of San Cristóbal de las Casas, and this is both a protest and a memorial. A number of the people that were imprisoned and implicated in the paramilitary activities that perpetrated the massacre were released from prison, and this was protesting their release from prison. So from the outset, I really feel it needs to be understood that I'm talking about participants in 2 different social movements. The Abejas and the Zapatistas work together. They're in solidarity with each other, but they're very careful to distinguish themselves. The Abejas and Zapatistas have taken different approaches to what they call their war against the state. And what I'm attempting to do in this talk is to situate their resistance, which in the case of corn production, actually takes on very similar traits. I highlight the so-called war with the state and the presence of violence in the communities populated by supporters of the Abejas and the Zapatistas to give perspective on the basis of their resistance and the violence that farming families deal with and they're working against on an everyday basis, and really to highlight the tension that exists in these communities. So I think that it's important to note that rural Chiapas is not divided into homogeneous communities of Zapatista supporters and Abeja supporters and so on. Communities are heterogeneous, populated by Zapatistas, Abejas, and supporters of the state or of the political party that's in power. In some cases, people with fiercely different ideologies occupy the same community spaces. And so in this period of low-intensity warfare and violence, you might wonder what the focus of this resistance that I'm talking about is. Are the supporters of these movements seeking training or education for clandestine warfare? Are they perpetrating their own acts of violence against people who have wronged them? Are they invading land and evicting former inhabitants? No. What the focus of these movements, their main concern has been to provide their communities with services that the state has been denying them for some years. At present, one of the most critical functions of the larger social movement agenda and these networks that have been put together by the social movement is the provisioning of agroecological education and training and knowledge exchange in these self-declared autonomous communities that are populated by farmers and resistance. So, not surprisingly, a lot of this attention has been focused on one particular crop, maize. And I think that Chiapas is a really interesting location to look at issues of food and agricultural production because of its turbulent land reform history. We heard a little bit about this throughout the talks today, but people have been fighting for land reform since the Mexican Revolution, and many scholars agree that land reform came to Chiapas in a very disjointed manner and very late. For example, in some cases, farmers were still waiting for their land reform petitions to be heard at the same time that the Constitution was amended for all intents and purposes to cancel state-led land reform to coincide with the entry into the neoliberal world, as it were. And land reform is really just one way that we can think about how indigenous peasant identities are constructed in Mexico and in Chiapas in particular. But as scholars of peasant studies have more recently discussed, a focus on land reform excludes other important issues that farmers deal with on a daily basis. Cyclical migration, for example, as we heard from Daniela and Lucila's family, remittances, and other off-farm income. And what I think is really interesting is that I'm working in communities where those things are important and they're discussed, but the way that they're discussed is in trying to keep people from migrating. In a community in resistance, it's important to maintain as many of your whole and healthy and young population as you can. If those people leave, it's really hard to resist. And so migration is generally discouraged in these places, and so they don't see a lot of remittance income, and they don't see a lot of their young people leaving the community. It doesn't mean that people don't leave, but it's far, far fewer than what we see in other places in Mexico. So one of the other things that I think is really important that extends beyond this idea of tying peasants to the land is the connection that farmers have through these broader social movements, such as the abejas and the zapatistas. And I want to situate them just a little bit further. The abejas are most commonly connected with the Highlands of Chiapas due to the legacy of Acteal. And then the red area there is the municipality of Chanjalo, which is in the Highlands of Chiapas. But when people think about the Zapatistas, they generally place them in the southeast, over here in the Lacandon jungle. And it's true, the Zapatistas do indeed populate the Lacandon, but their supporters can be found throughout the state, and they too can be found in the Highland municipality of Chanjalo. And because my focus is on coffee producers, I need to be in the areas where coffee grows. And so that the Highlands are very suitable to coffee production. And I have to say, it's not a gross generalization to say that in Chanjalo, land is divided by corn and coffee production. Practically every surface that isn't road, patio, or household is given over to the cafetal, which is the shade production coffee plot, or the milpa, which is the more traditional corn growing area, which may also be intercropped with beans and squash. Although Chanjalo is populated by farmers in resistance, there are not any borders or boundaries to the autonomous communities, and there are not demarcated zones, again, for the Zapatistas or the abejas or Priavistas, for example. And so one of the central questions at the start of my research was, how does autonomy function in these heterogeneous, self-declared autonomous spaces? What might seem quite obvious on the face of things is that communities in resistance can't be autonomous without the production of food for subsistence. And in this case, the production of corn. And while as a political geographer, I think this actually opens up a really interesting way to think about how we view autonomy and how we understand and know and construct autonomy. I'm actually going to bracket that for this talk. And what I want to focus on for the remaining time is the solutions that farmers are seeking through their solidarity networks to combat problems in their fields. In particular, I'm going to share empirical work regarding farmer perceptions of climate change and genetically modified corn. And the conversation I'd like to have today is based on my ongoing fieldwork with members of 2 coffee-producing cooperatives in the Highland municipality of Chanjalo. And although I'm not going to discuss fair trade coffee production at all, I do want to highlight that the people that I'm working with are not just tied into these social movements of the Zapatistas and the abejas, but also coffee cooperatives, which gives them access to additional and differently situated networks. So when I first arrived in Chiapas in 2010, my conversations with farmers, this is going to shock you, they were about coffee. And so I was really focused on the production of coffee, but it was impossible for me to have a conversation about coffee without having a conversation about corn and livelihood. And it should come as no surprise that corn is central to everyday life in the Highlands, and without the production of food for subsistence, the ability to resist or maintain a resistance or a social movement that's based in resisting support from the state and other entities related to the state, it's significantly diminished the ability to resist. As one farmer pointed out to me early in my fieldwork, the importance of the milpa is very much corn, but a little more than corn. The milpa is part of our richness and our life, but it is also a part of the struggle of our organization. It is a part of our resistance and a part of our autonomy. But what does this mean for farmers in the Highlands? In the Highlands, there's one harvest of corn each year. Practically speaking, what that means is that farming families need to produce enough corn to last them between harvests. Yet each year, corn supplies run short. forcing families to turn to the market. One of the major hurdles of their resistance is this need to purchase corn. And it's not remiss to say that self-sufficiency in subsistence farming communities is a myth. I'm not going to get into the myth, I'll let you go. Farmers rely on the market for a number of goods that can't be produced at home. Soap, salt, Western dress, for example. But the purchase of corn is egregious, and it's bound up in concerns of where this corn is coming from and what type of seeds they are. And consistently throughout my research, I heard things like this from farmers. We don't want to buy corn because it's transgenic. It is a very big problem, this corn. It is not any good, and it is making people sick, or it makes people sick. But at the same time, having to buy corn in the marketplace is a reality that has been accepted by most of the farmers that I've talked to. Many have to buy corn, but with good weather and enough land, do not have to buy too much. And I think that these quotes really encapsulate three of the most common issues that farmers discussed with me during my research. And the first is the lack of land that's available to farmers in the Highlands. The second is weather or perceived climate change in the area. And the third is genetically modified corn. So a shortage of land continues to be a problem in the Highlands. And I don't think that this pronouncement is unexpected for most of the people here today. What I think is more interesting is farmer perceptions of climate change and genetically modified organisms and how they've used their participation in larger social movements to create and mobilize a much larger network to devise strategies for adaptation and mitigation while simultaneously opening up spaces that help to keep their social movements alive. And so first I want to talk about my conversations with farmers about climate change. And one of the things I found interesting is that farmers are tapping into their networks within and outside the Highlands to cope with what they see as changing climatic conditions in their fields. So Zapatista and the Beja groups extend throughout the state of Chiapas and into a number of different climatic regions. And so farmers have been exchanging news and ideas and seeds. And weather events that damage corn, I've been told, have been increasing. And farmers claim that as a result of this, there are more pests in their fields and that they're experiencing more problems in their storage areas. And so that really significantly reduces the amount of corn that each household had, both within the field and then post-harvest. And so two major strategies that have been undertaken in the Highlands to combat this are, first, to experiment with neem as a pest deterrent. And I have to note that this is something that's primarily being done by Zapatista groups. And then the second is to conduct seed exchanges and to assess the adaptability of seeds found in other parts of Chiapas. And this is something that's being done by both groups. So the seed exchanges have thus far shown that the climate variability between the more tropical areas of Chiapas and the cloud forest areas is still significant enough that lowland corn hasn't been grown with very many successes in the highland areas. But the important thing here is that I think the important thing here is that such networks exist and that farmers are thinking about adaptation. One farmer in the Highlands told me that we talk about climate change too, and we're trying to figure on this because there could be droughts or hurricanes that could wipe out the seeds. So we are trying to make the vital improvement of corn through looking at varieties from other climates and doing experiments between climates. But it shows that adaptation is very slow. But we have also done experiments in this zone with seed from this zone. And we've learned quite a bit about the different varieties just here. But weather events and secure storage continue to be a problem in the Highlands. Here we can see the result of bagging harvested corn. Due to problems with storing harvested corn, some farmers have undertaken experiments with creating more secure storage and also insect repellent storage. And this is something that I saw all over the Highlands. There's just really not a place for people to store their corn that keeps it away from, I'm going to go with mice in this particular instance. So the use of neem is actually one strategy that's part of the network, the networking that's conducted within the movement, and in particular, like I said, the Zapatista movement. Neem requires tropical conditions to grow, and so the use of neem in the Highlands is dependent on the interaction of groups in different parts of the state. Neem is a broadleaf evergreen tree that originated in India and can grow up to 30 meters tall, and it has really important insecticidal properties. And I'm sure when I say neem, people start thinking about all of the fights that happen in India, and it's a really exciting thing to look into, but I can't do it here. In Chiapas, it can be grown in the north in Palenque, and also in the south, and exchanged with the highland communities. A few communities took on the burden of experimentation. Rather than experiment in their personal fields, though, they used their communal ejido milpa corn to conduct the experiments. And in 2010, the main part of the experiment was focused on keeping bugs away from harvested, stored corn. And so the communities raised funds through their outside networks, calling on assistance from partner NGOs within Mexico and the United States for the purchase of wood and lamina to build small storage sheds that they would then apply neem to, whether in whole leaf form or in oil form. And the storage units were built in the communal areas, and so they were really visible. They were in highly visible spaces, so the whole community could observe and learn from the process. So now I want to shift to talking about the responses to genetically modified corn. Another really major component of this networking that happens within Chiapas is the sharing of ideas and news related to genetically modified corn, and really actually extending that network beyond Chiapas. The incursion of GMO corn into Mexico has been a grave concern of farmers in the Highlands. And I think that these three quotes assist with understanding how farmers are coping with the potential spread of genetically modified corn into their fields. This region is reliant on corn. It is the principal crop. It is part of agroecology, and we are trying to maintain the native seeds, because we know here in Mexico they are going to accept transgenic seeds, and this will hurt the growing food. Mexico is the center of the origin of corn. It is not Monsanto or other companies. And we teach that our struggle against the corporations and against the transgenics is through our corn. And the photo is a stencil graffiti that I took in San Cristobal de las Casas. It says, Monsanto no es un santo. Monsanto is not a saint. So one of the ways that the incursion of GMOs is being dealt with is through agroecology training, but it is also through utilizing their networks to create seed banks within the Highlands and living banks, seed banks in other parts of the world. And I do want to focus in just a bit on this extended seed banking project that was begun in Oventique, which is a Zapatista center in the Highlands. And I should note that the quotes that I'm using are here come from the initial meetings between farmers in Oventique and their NGO partner in the United States, and not from my personal interviews. So at the meetings with the NGO that assisted with raising funds and awareness for the seed saving projects, one of the Zapatista leaders stated, "We must all understand that only our natural corn has allowed us to survive, to resist, and to withstand our sufferings." And it was really important for the farmers to come up with a name for the project that demonstrated this. And so the farmers decided to call the project the Mother Seeds in Resistance Project. And the name of the project in Tzotzil, which is one of the four most commonly spoken Mayan languages in the Highlands, along with Setal, Tohodobal, and Chol, is Smee Nusunbil Sikil Pokot. Sorry, my Tzotzil is not awesome. And the first part translates to mother seeds, a descriptor that was drawn on because, as one farmer described it, because our creation stories tell us we are made of corn, and we renew our bodies with corn every day. But Sikil Pokot is translated as resistance. But the direct translation from Tzotzil to Spanish, or to English, is to withstand suffering, which is quite different than resistencia or resistance. Corn allows these farmers to withstand the violence that has been done against them. It allows them to resist the state. And I think that this is really an important distinction to make, one that was highlighted by another member of the group. Our insurrection cannot continue without our corn. And so the seed saving project was begun, and the slide was entered too fast. Freezers and generators were purchased for the community, and corn seeds of multiple varieties were collected from all over aligned communities throughout the state of Chiapas. Understanding the limitations of this method, for example, relying on electricity to maintain the cold storage is problematic, as electricity is inconsistently supplied to communities. Due to the fact that part of the resistance is to not pay for their electricity, and this is just one of many graffiti reminders to not pay for your lights that are all over the Highlands. So the Zapatistas, through their connection to the same US-based NGO, reached out to their greater network and began to send their seeds to other farmers around the world, spreading the caretaking of their genetic heritage. Highland corn is now being grown in the United States, Kenya, Zimbabwe, India, and South Africa. And this is a photos of people who are participating in the Mother Seeds in Resistance project. So not only are the resistance movements planting corn as part of their struggle, others are also sowing seeds of resistance and solidarity. So although the globalization of agriculture and food production presents pressing problems for farmers in the Highlands, their ability to tap into these global networks has been a critical part of the maintenance of the cultural heritage in the Highlands. And once again, I want want to thank UCLA, Allison, and acknowledge folks that helped get me into the field and the person that made the beautiful maps that I used.